Of the cities of the ancient Silk Road connecting China and Europe, none has a more illustrious history than Samarkand, going back to the 8th century BC. This is a fabled city, conquered by Alexander the Great in the 3rd century BC, by the Mongol leader Genghis Kahn nearly a millennium later, followed by the Central Asian conqueror Amir Timur, and in the 20th century it was of course under the domination of the former Soviet Union.
Today, Samarkand is a city of 500,000 people, Uzbekistan's second largest after Tashkent, nestled near the border with Tajikistan, which is less than a dozen miles away.
You can think of it as two cities, one modern, the other old, with some of the best preserved and historically influential architecture in the Islamic world.
A prime example is the place you see here. This is the great mausoleum of Amir Timur, or Tamerlane if you prefer, built in the early 1400s by a Persian architect whose work here had great influence. Timur had his own mausoleum prepared in the city of his birth to the south of here, but when he died suddenly during an expedition to China in 1405, the mountain passes to his planned final resting place were snowed in, so he was buried here instead. This mausoleum began to be built in 1403 after the death of Muhammad Sultan, Timur's beloved grandson and heir apparent. Another of his grandsons, Ulugh Beg, seized the throne and had the mausoleum completed. Sort of unintentionally, it became the family crypt of the so-called Timurid dynasty. It's very crowded inside this dome where Timur is laid to rest under that jade slab in the middle, surrounded by two sons, his grandson, and ironically the largest of the slabs is reserved for Timur's teacher. That is indeed green jade, very impressive piece, a stone that was brought here to mark the spot where Timur is laid to rest. There's something else I want to share with you about this tomb, but I think I'm going to step outside to do it. There's said to be an inscription inside the tomb memorializing a warning from the great conqueror against anyone who should molest his gravesite. This has come to be known as the Curse of Timur. Well, in 1941, Soviet scientists dug up the great conqueror in the name of research. Among other things, they established his height and the fact that he walked with a limp, likely due to a battle injury. 2 days after he was disinterred, the Nazis launched their World War II attack against the Soviet Union. Stalin, a superstitious man, is said to have ordered Timur's corpse immediately placed back in the tomb. I'm staying in what's described as the Old City. It's a residential area that stretches up a long hill up above some of the more significant antiquity sites here. And it's a real neighborhood. Passing a school here, as you can see, with all the uniformed children. It looks like an elementary school. Very nice one. The housing here is more middle class than anything else, with lots of multi-story homes. Where my inn is located, it's really sort of a blend between a homestay and a guest house. I guess it's more appropriately called a guest house. The Samarkand Amira is the name of it. Very pleasant place with a handful of rooms upstairs and down facing a spacious courtyard where one can have very nice breakfast or just relax there. I hear the young children playing in the late afternoons, early evenings when I return home, so to speak. Of course, there's no promotional consideration involved, but I'm thoroughly enjoying my stay at the Samarkand Amira. And it's just a short walk, really, down the hill through these winding streets to get to some of the main arteries that lead you to the places you want to see. Just a fact that Uzbeks have large families. This is, of course, predominantly Sunni Muslim. And there's another school. Looks like maybe a preschool. But just a lot of families. The sounds of children sort of light up the day here. You could just tell by noticing the way people react to one another that neighbors know each other in this neighborhood. They may or may not worship at the same mosque, but they're familiar with one another. And of course, it's the nature of the architecture, the fact that the housing is side by side. What yards or gardens there are on the interior of these properties. This is sort of a transitioning city, I suppose, because, and has been for quite some time in the modern era, because, as I say, the new city, the modern city, appears to be quite a bustling place. I came here by train from Tashkent, and of course there's a large and very beautiful train station that greets you when you get here, and you see all sorts of restaurants, cafes, mid-rise buildings with banks and office towers and all the rest, until you get to the older part of the city, which of course gives off a different vibe. The government is doing what it can to encourage the growth of Samarkand. They've constructed a new international airport here, even though many of the foreign visitors who come to Uzbekistan will still continue to land at Tashkent because, of course, the size of the airport. But the flights from here at the same time are growing, and the national government wants that to continue to happen. I've come to the most iconic site in Samarkand, and a place you've probably seen in photos or videos, even if you didn't know what it was. This grand complex is Registan, the heart of Samarkand during the glory days of the Timurid Empire, from the 14 to the 1600s. Registan in Persian means sandy place or desert, and it was old Samarkand's public square, where people gathered to socialize, hear royal proclamations, and witness public executions.
No executions these days, but the Registan is still very much a public place.
You see the same Persian-influenced architectural theme in these great buildings as with Timur's mausoleum. But these aren't mausoleums. They're three great madrasas, or Islamic schools, the oldest of which, the Ulugh Beg Madrasa, which you see behind me, being built between 1417 and 1420. The two others were added in the 1600s. These wonderful buildings are representative of the so-called Timurid Renaissance. That was an age of enlightenment from the late 14th to the early 16th centuries, and that predated and partly overlapped with the European Renaissance. It was a time of rebirth for science, mathematics, and literature that picked up where the so-called Islamic Golden Age from the 8th to the 13th centuries left off. And Samarkand, along with Herat in present-day Afghanistan, the other Timurid capital, was at the center of it all. You're not looking at merely palaces and other government buildings. Rather, this is a complex of madrasas. Would-be scholars and clerics came here from near and far, giving Samarkand a reputation for enlightenment and progress throughout the known Islamic world. And that has been preserved for those who come here to view this center of the Timurid Renaissance today. At its peak, the empire stretched from Palestine to Iran to northern India and even parts of China. And it was customary for the lives of artisans among the conquered peoples to be spared, so that many were brought here to help build this city. I've come inside the Ulugh Beg Madrasa, the oldest one. When I say inside, I mean into the inner courtyard of the madrasa. When you see these buildings from the entrances, you sort of lose sight of the fact that they're the front faces of some very intricate buildings with interior courtyards, including the principal one where I am now. This is a two-story madrasa with beautiful Persian arches and the classical turquoise and deep blue colors synonymous with the architecture of the age. They're designed as places of rest and meditation, and so students could come out of the classrooms here and intermingle in these courtyards with fountains in the center and marble walkways all around the edge of green spaces, and share their ideas or just share a cup of tea.
By the way, while strolling Samarkand, you're never far from good things to eat. And thankfully, that includes Uzbekistan's amazingly delicious round bread.
Of all the antiquity sites in Samarkand that visitors come here to see, this one fascinates me as much as any of them. This is the Shoizinda necropolis. Shoizinda being Persian for the living god. It's Samarkand's oldest and largest collection of mausoleums and graves, with buildings that date back as far as the 1100s. If you look closely at the hillside that comes up directly behind these lofty mausoleums, you see that quote-unquote ordinary people have continued to be buried here in modern times. So it's very much a place connecting Samarkand's historic past with the present. Why do so many people who, after walking through the great madrasas and visiting the tomb of Amir Timur, come here to see these tombs? Well, it's primarily because of one tomb hidden away far up the hill inside this necropolis. It's the tomb of Qutham ibn Abbas, a first cousin and companion of the Prophet Muhammad. Abbas was an Arab statesman and preacher born in Medina in Saudi Arabia in the year 624. He died in Samarkand in 677. He was the ruler of Mecca before coming here, during the first wave of the Arab conquest of Central Asia. He's recognized as the first preacher of Islam in the territory that is now Uzbekistan. So how did he end up entombed here? Well, his burial place here has never changed, but in the 7th century, there was another cemetery here, one over which a madrasa was later built, a madrasa that no longer exists. Flash forward to the 14th century, and the great conqueror Amir Timur decided to build a mausoleum over Abbas's gravesite. I'm entering that mausoleum now. Well, I've made it into the tomb room. It's a spectacular, small space with super high ceilings. There's a latticed piece of wood that separates sitting area, this outer chamber, from the stone tomb itself, and you can see through it. One other set of mausoleums that I would like to show you. Two facing and one at the end. The one to my left contains the remains of one of Amir Timur's 9 wives. The other one, the most beautiful of the 3, is a mausoleum that has been empty for nearly 6 centuries. The reason this beautiful tiled mausoleum has remained empty is because it was prepared for the youngest and 9th wife of Amir Timur. However, she at some point decided to move to Herat in present-day Afghanistan, the other capital of the Timurid Empire, along with her immediate family members, her parents, and perhaps some siblings. And she remained there, although married to the great conqueror. But she ended up dying in Herat and is entombed there, leaving this place vacant. It was never filled, not even with the 10th wife.
The past remains remarkably accessible in Samarkand, unspoiled by the commercial clutter we've come to expect beside culturally important places in much of the world. It turns out it's enough to sit in the shade and contemplate what exists here, as travelers along the Silk Road have done for centuries.